Welcome to the Special Education Essentials for Parents and Families podcast with your host, David Tollner. In each episode, we'll have guests who are professionals in the special education and disability services industry who support children with special needs. The law is complex, and this podcast does not cover all situations, legal responsibilities, or variations in different circumstances. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only, and nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or the firm. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace legal advice. You can find this show on all the major platforms including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, TollnerLawOffices.com. Now, here's the host of Special Education Essentials for Parents and Families, David Tollner.
Yes, welcome everyone. Welcome to episode number 2 of Special Education Essentials. I am your host, David Tollner, and we will be talking about how to improve your child's IEP, right? The whole podcast from beginning to end will be about how to improve your child's IEP, some of the tricks of the trade, and you'll hear down the road as I interview individuals in the special needs industry, right? Private school owners, speech therapists, I'll have a superintendent eventually, attorneys from the other side. I want you to have just a complete understanding of what happens in special ed and how, in using that information, you can improve your child's progress in school, right? That's the whole point of special education, is that we take all of our kids with learning disabilities and make sure that they experience meaningful educational progress in accordance with their circumstances. That's the legal standard and what our firm is all about. If you're with us now for the first time, I invite you and encourage you to look at episode number 1 or listen to it, because what I'm going to do in the first 3 episodes, and today's a continuation of this plan, is I'm going to go through my list of 10 keys, if you will, essential factors and tools that you should use in your child's IEP. In the first session, the first episode that we did last week, we went through the first 3 rules, if you will, of an IEP. Very simple. Record, record, record. No reason not to record. Be respectful and firm because you are recording. And the last thing you want to do is put all of your emotion and anger on a recording that will be used against you later. What we talked about last week is how judges do not like parents who take their frustration and disappointment out on school staff. So be very careful if you're recording, and you will, because there's no good excuse not to. You're going to be recorded as well. And so you want to make sure you're ready for that emotionally. And then we talked about how you prepare. Most IEPs, the people in the room that are from the school are not as well prepared as you can be. They haven't, in many circumstances, even bothered to read your child's IEP. So because you can come in with all of the essential information and teach them about your child, the better prepared you are, the better. All right, so that was episode number 1. Now we're going to get into rule number 4. Rule number 4 is know what you want to achieve. We tend to, as parents, trust school teachers and staff and administrators, and I think that's fine. But when you have a child with special needs and you're on an IEP, you really have to be careful how much you trust. And by that, I mean, do not wait for them to solve your child's education problems. As much as you can, go into that IEP not only prepared, but knowing what you want out of it. Most parents walk into IEPs and they're looking for the teachers to tell them what their child needs. And that's understandable. You're not in the classroom. You only have, a home-based understanding of your child, not an education-based understanding. But none of that matters when your child's on an IEP. You have to go in with a plan. You can't go in just counting on somebody else to decide what your child needs. And that isn't always easy. Most parents have an understanding of what their child needs to be successful in school, because if they're working with them at home, they get a feel for where the deficits are, get a feel for what works by way of supports, or they've already hired therapists and tutors and things of that nature to drive progress in the home, right? So the things you learn there are going to serve you and your child in the classroom as well. So a key is, because you're prepared and you've read through the documentation more than anybody else, you're going into every IEP with what you want to achieve with that IEP. Do you think your child needs a one-to-one aid to be successful? Because actions and total lack of focus are the problem, or at least part of the problem. If that's the case, then you're reading the file, picking out evidence of your child doing much better when there's a one-to-one adult there to redirect them to the instruction, right? That's what you're after in that scenario. And so because you're the most prepared one, you're the one who's picking out from the file, hey, this is what Teacher Smith said, right? This is what we learned from the tutor. And you're putting that all on the record because you're recording and everybody on the team is listening. And because you're the one who's prepared, you're going to be able to provide all the support for that thing you want to achieve. Let's say a one-to-one aid. Now, you can be the most prepared person on the planet that we know, and you can know exactly what you want, and you won't necessarily get the district to agree, but you've got to do it anyway. You've got to prepare anyway. You've got to record anyway, and you have to know what you want to achieve going into every IEP anyway. Because even if you don't get it what you want there, right? If your child continues to struggle and we continue to see a lack of progress or even regression, you can revert back to old IEPs. Why? Because you recorded, and you can always listen to them, and you can then eventually regurgitate everything you asked for before. Now you're prepared. You can talk about the lack of progress, and you can reintroduce the things you want for your child. Now you've got even more evidence than you did the last time, right? So you always have to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, they won't have a plan, or their plan is going to be the minimum. And the last thing you want for your child, of course, is the minimum. You aren't necessarily by law entitled to, as they say, the Cadillac of services, but you are entitled to progress. Okay. And it has to be meaningful, not de minimis. For years and years and years, we operate under this de minimis standard, right? Where any progress the districts would say was enough, all they needed to do. But about 5 years ago or so, the United States Supreme Court defined better, and I think on behalf of students with special needs, that meaningful progress must be in accordance with that child's circumstances, right? So if you are at home and you're working one-on-one with your child and you're seeing great things, but your child in school isn't capable of doing those things because distractions and there's no one-to-one aid to redirect, then and there's no progress as a result, then you really want to go into that IEP prepared to talk about why your child needs one-to-one, the evidence associated with that need, and hopefully you get it. And if you don't, then perhaps you need to call somebody like me, an attorney, a special ed attorney, an advocate in your area. It's not an attorney, but somebody who understands the law, and bring them to your next IEP to finalize, if in many cases, what your child needs to be successful in school. Okay? So record, be respectful. You never want to be the angry parent in the room. Prepare and go into IEPs knowing what you want to achieve. And now, number 5, which in many respects is the most important of all these, although I've said that about a few others, and I'll probably say it about a few more. Ask 1,000 questions. You're the parent. You're not in that classroom. And not only you're not in that classroom, you're not on the playground at recess and lunch, right? You're not in the therapy sessions. And your child potentially is going to act differently, have progress in different settings throughout the school day and throughout the school week. Mondays may be bad. Fridays may be great, right? Mornings may be good. Afternoons may be a waste of time in terms of getting your child to engage with instruction. But you don't know that because you're not in the classroom, right? Your child is in that school for 30 hours a week, and you're not there for 30 hours a week. If you're lucky, right, you're a parent volunteer, so you get to see your child in that setting, which is hugely advantageous if you get the opportunity. But other than that, you're just a parent who comes into an IEP potentially once a year, and you, by law, are an equal member of that team, right? You have as much power, and your position is every bit as meaningful as anyone else. But you're at a significant disadvantage. You have no idea what's going on in that classroom or what they're seeing from your child day in and day out, minute by minute even. So what you have to do is you have to solve that problem, and there's only one way to do it. And that is to ask 1,000 questions, right? You just have to take the time, and you're taking everybody's time, but that's okay. You're going to have to be comfortable with that. And you're going to have to take the time to ask the questions that give you the information you need to be an equal member of that IEP team, right? If you don't, then you're not going to have the ability to introduce the concepts you need or the support you need to get that thing you want to achieve at the IEP because you don't have the information you need. So what I will do in some circumstances, and every time I do it, it's valuable. I don't remember a time that I've taken the time to literally walk through from the beginning of the day through the end of the day. Now every child presents with deficit areas or behaviors or disabilities that require you to walk through every day. You may just have to walk through a math class if there's a math learning disability, or English if there's a reading disability. But for many kids, we walk through the entire day because if there are social issues, I want to know where those come up. If there are behavioral issues, I want to know what part of the day is worse, what part is better, what classes may be preferred subjects. You don't see any behaviors. And then unpreferred or non-preferred subjects, you see a lot. You've got to have that information to be a meaningful member of the team. So I will start at literally car drop, my child sets foot on, or my client in this case sets foot on the school campus, and I want to know how they enter the classroom. Potentially, if it's an issue in my client's case, I want to know how well they follow instructions to take their seat, how long it takes them to get ready for instruction. I want to know how many times the teacher has to prompt them to pay attention, if that's the issue. And I want to know in every class. So I'm going to ask all the teachers that question, because I want to leave that IEP, and here's the point. I want to leave that IEP knowing as much as they do, so that I can comment with a sense of knowledge and understanding what my child needs to be successful in that program, because now I have the information they do. Okay? Very, very important part of the IEP process. If you don't record and you're not prepared and you let them say everything and make all the decisions, and you don't ask 1,000 questions because you don't really need in your mind to know the details of what's happening in school, then you're going to get what you get. And as simple as that. They're going to, and if you're very lucky and you have a great teacher and a great school staff, you'll get lucky and you'll do well. Your child will be fine. And that happens, right? But what often happens, and why we're a growing and successful law firm and get lots of calls from lots of parents, is because that doesn't happen as often as it should. More often, the teacher is overwhelmed, and your client is not getting what is needed. And if you're somebody who has had an IEP for a long time, and you're even thinking about calling counsel to support you, that typically means you've seen very little progress, if any, for an extended period of time, right? That's a sign. An extended period of a lack of progress is a sign the district is failing your child, right? Not just failing them educationally, but violating the law if your child is on an IEP. So you don't really know that until you ask 1,000 questions, right? As far as you cannot let general statements of your child's doing great stand. You have to follow up with, what does that mean they're doing great? Well, what about paying attention to instruction? How many times are you prompting them? And very often, as you dig into teachers who would like to make general statements about how your child is doing, and you start to ask detailed questions about how your child is doing, you're going to find that the answers tell you far more than if you just let the teacher summarize what's going on. Teachers are trained to be positive. And we like that about teachers. We don't want to necessarily hear all the worst things about our kids. But if your child's on an IEP and you're responsible for making sure they make progress, then you need to know everything that's going on in that classroom from beginning of the day through the end. And you also need to ask questions depending on your child's deficit areas, and particularly if they have social deficits, about what it looks like at recess and lunch. Very important part of the school day. What a lot of parents don't understand is that social skills are ed skills. We see them just like we see math and reading, right? We want to see progress because school is not just about learning things, science and history. It's also about developing properly how you interact with others, in particular your peers, right? Social development, huge. Why we send our kids to school. And in some cases, the most important thing we get out of school for our children, right? They'll learn at their own pace, but if they're socially behind, if their social development is stunted and they have huge deficits there, then the only way to find out just how bad that is to ask 1,000 questions about the social piece of school. How many friends do they have? How often are they seen actually communicating? At lunch and recess when they're playing, is it parallel play, which means they're on the playground with other kids, but there's no interaction, right? It's just they're climbing side by side, or they're seemingly playing, but there's zero interaction, zero laughter between, zero communication. We call that parallel play, and we want to see interaction, right? That's what we hope to see for all of our kids. Or is your kid one that just walks around the yard by themselves every recess and lunch, right? Do they eat alone? Do they interact? You need to know all of that, and you need to have details as much as you can get them. And because not everybody's got eyes on the playground like a teacher does in the classroom, sometimes you have to go check it out. In fact, part of asking 1,000 questions is asking to go observe your child in school as often as you can. If recess and lunch is an issue and it's summertime and it's outside and it's not pouring rain and you can park your car and just watch your child from a distance, do it. Find out yourselves in real time what your child is doing. Don't even rely on the answers to your questions. Just go watch. If your school allows, and they all must if you request, right? You can observe almost as often as you like in some districts. Sometimes they'll try and limit you, but certainly once a month is appropriate and reasonable. Go into the classroom and observe what's happening with your child. If your classrooms allow you to do that surreptitiously, right, behind a window or without really your child even knowing you're there, all the better. Very often children who know their parents are there are not showing you everything they would show the teacher with you not there. Or if they show you something, the response you're going to get from the district, oh, that doesn't happen. You were there. That's why it happened. So to avoid that as much as possible, observe without being noticed by your child, which can be very difficult. I get it. But even if you will be noticed, tell your child that morning you're going to go in and just volunteer in the classroom and see how things are going, and then just go do it. You're going to pick up stuff that is valuable. And that's the key. Knowledge is power when it comes to an IEP. If you do not have knowledge of what's going on in your child's classroom and the way they're being treated by their peers, the way the teacher interacts with them, their response to all of that, the struggles in any given subject, right? The lack of attention, the behaviors, everything, the social piece, everything that your child is struggling with in school, and many do struggle, right? If you're on an IEP, your child is struggling somewhere. You need to get as much information about as you can. All right. So number 5, hugely important, ask 1,000 questions. Now, here's what happens sometimes when you start this process. You've got a room full of teachers and administrators, and you'll start down this path. And invariably, one administrator is going to say, Mr. Smith, this is taking a very long time. We have a lot of people here that have to get back to their classrooms. Can we do this offline? Can you answer these questions, or write an email and we'll answer them in writing? You have to resist that. It's very hard to resist sometimes, but you have to. Respectful but firm, as we talked about earlier. But your response to that is simply this. Listen, I understand. I'm sorry, everybody. I value your time. I really do. And I know this is taking longer than even I was hoping for. But it's so important. I know what you know, right? It's my legal obligation, both as a parent, right? This is my child we're talking about, but also my legal right to be an equal member of this team, right? My opinion as to what happens to my child in terms of the supports and services we give him or her to make progress, right? I'm just as important to that decision as you are. Yet I come in here to this with this great disadvantage. I'm not in school. You are. I'm supposed to come in here and help this team make a decision about what my child needs, but I can't without the information you possess. So I'm sorry. I apologize for taking so much time. I hope to get through this really quick. I'm going as fast as I can, but I have to ask these questions because they're absolutely essential to my understanding what you see in my child every day so that I can be an equal and meaningful member of this IEP team, right? That's your response. If they still cut you off, and they might, and certainly districts will, we get big egos in districts, and sometimes they're far too big. And it's our way or the highway. And damn it, I don't care what you say, we're going to do this my way. Because my job is to protect my teachers. And your child is secondary to that protection. All right? And they say, no, we're not going to let you ask any more questions. You don't need to fight through it. You don't need to get angry. You just say, you know what? That's unfortunate. I really feel like I, was getting where I needed to be as quickly as I could. I can't really be a meaningful member unless I ask these questions. But if you're telling me I can't ask them, I can't ask them. I don't know where we go from there because I can't help. But you're in control, so go ahead. Right? Or push through when they say no, then you're done. At some point, you don't have to push too hard because what you've got now is a technical IEP violation. The law requires your involvement, right? It expects it because you're a parent. And it's a very reasonable thing to say that I need to know what you know to be an effective parent in this situation and a meaningful member of this team. So what you've got now, because you're recording every single time, is a recording of that pushback, which is a significant, in some minds, violation. Then, if down the road progress isn't being made, you have to potentially hire somebody like me to get your child what they need. A violation that's going to show up, particularly as you didn't have the chance to get the information you needed to help that team make a decision that would have worked potentially. Now you're actually going to use that administrator's sort of obstinance in your favor, right? And we do that all the time. And judges do not like when districts do not let parents talk or ask questions. And so we see when attorneys are there, they always let the questions get answered. When attorneys aren't there and they think that a parent set doesn't know the law, doesn't know their rights, that's when they push back hard to shut you up. And most parents, unfortunately, don't know they're being played and move on, trust some more. And in many, many, many cases, their children do not progress either at all or anywhere near how much they would or could if they were given the right supports and services. All right. So that's the reason why you ask 1,000 questions. Knowledge is power. Without it, you're useless. With it, you can really drive progress in your child because you have the knowledge you need to do so. All right. So know what you want to achieve and ask 1,000 questions. Another thing that parents often do and the districts love to do and that we are constantly battling over is get the reports you're going to talk about at that IEP in advance. We all learn differently. We all are able to process information differently. Many of us struggle to read and process information while somebody's talking for the first time, and you have no idea what you're reading because you're seeing it right now. Because you walked into an IEP and they handed you a 40-page psychoeducational evaluation and a 35-page IEP draft, and you hadn't seen them before. You have no idea what the goals are. You have no idea what the outcome of any of the tests are because you have just seen the reports. And now, as you're trying to appreciate all the somebody summarizing the report, you're supposed to process all of that in time to make decisions about support, services, goals, etc. Very, very difficult, even for me. And I've read a couple thousand, if not more, of all these documents, right? So you never want to step in, if you can help it at all, you never want to step into an IEP without an advanced review of any document they're going to talk about at that IEP. So here's simply what you do. About a week before the IEP, when you know, let's say it's a triennial or an annual, right? So you know there's going to be a new IEP draft, or a triennial, so you know there's going to be a big report. Your child, as you have known over the last 2 months, has been tested, and now people are working on a draft of the report. About a week before the IEP, you send an email to maybe the school psychologist who's driving that report. It could be anybody on the team. School psychologists and the principal are probably good bets and your best bets. And you say, listen, we have an IEP coming in a week. Please make sure I have all the documents that are going to be discussed at that IEP at least 72 hours in advance so I have time to review. Okay? Because you want that time. You need that time. And you want to be able, when you review, to look at all the errors. You want to be able to see in advance where they're wrong. You want to be able to talk about on the record that that's not what happened. This is what happened, right? If the history's off or a summary of the history is wrong, right? You want, and then more importantly, however, you want to understand what they found as best you can so that you formulate the questions you want to ask about that report. I don't understand this. This I got. That's actually consistent with everything I know about Johnny. This is not consistent. So tell me more about this. You're not going to be able to very effectively, particularly in a quick moving IEP, ask all the questions you need to ask at that IEP if you do not have that document in advance. So send that email, request that document in advance, 72 hours, and get them and ask them to confirm in that email that will happen. And then here's the key. If it doesn't happen, cancel the IEP. Seriously. Why are you walking into any important meeting like that involves literally your child's education and whether or not they're making progress, right? And not review a report as important as a triennial and or an IEP draft with new goals that you've never seen before. So you always want to ask, and you always want 72 hours if you can get it. Now, if you ask for 72 and they give it to you in 48 and you have time to read it and prepare, great. Don't cancel the IEP unless you want to piss somebody off. You certainly within your rights because they told you they would give it to you 72 hours. But go forward with the IEP and you're ready, right? You're prepared. You've read everything. You know what you want to achieve now. You have the questions ready. Boom, you're going into the IEP as a very prepared parent. But if you get it the night before and you don't have time to review it, you get it that morning and you don't have time, they still haven't given it to you in enough time for you to read it and appreciate it and process it and really develop all your responses to it, then cancel the IEP. Write an email saying, listen, I just got this morning. I asked for it. It was confirmed that I would get it 72 hours in advance. I just got it this morning. I'm not ready. I don't have time to read it, or I just got it at 4:30 last night and I didn't have time to read it last night. So we have to reschedule the IEP. Done. The only reason not to do that is if there's a critical time constraint somewhere, right? You need this IEP. One, we'll talk about experts at the next session, but you've got somebody coming who's very hard to schedule. So you have to go forward with the IEP because you don't want to have the IEP move a month and a half away because the person that's coming, their schedule is that tight. Maybe there's something you absolutely are convinced is going to be provided as an offer of service that your child desperately needs. And you can't push off that IEP because when you push off an IEP, you've got to be ready for that IEP not to be rescheduled again for 2 or 3 weeks. So you've got to keep that in mind. Is there something critical in the 2 or 3 weeks if I cancel this IEP? If the answer to that question is no, and there's no special guest coming whose calendar you have to protect and who you can't get back anytime soon, then do yourself a favor and cancel the IEP. All right? Just because you need the time to do this, and you can't go in prepared if you don't read the documents in advance. It's just not likely. There's some really smart people out there potentially listening to this. They'll say, I can do that. Well, good for you. Most can't. I can't. I can't go into IEPs and do my job effectively, even with reading these things 1,000 times, without reading that particular one before, right? Because my client's different in every case. I don't have an identical 2 clients from 2 different families. It just doesn't happen. And although districts sometimes treat all of these kids the same, we can't, and you can't, right? It's your child. So whatever you do, ask for all the documents in advance in writing, get their confirmation. If they haven't confirmed within 24, 48 hours of your email, send another one saying, I need confirmation. I'm going to get these docs. When they give you confirmation, make sure you get the docs or cancel the IEP. All right? All right. Now, we haven't spent a lot of time. We will over the course of this podcast, obviously week after week, talking about what is the underpinnings of the law in special ed. It's important, of course, but from a parent's perspective, we don't want to get bogged down in the law. I know that sounds strange coming from an attorney. We're supposed to be all about the law, and of course we are. But everything I'm telling you is based in some way on a statute or case law. And so I don't need you in order to have a better IEP for your child to really have an intricate understanding of the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which drives all this. And of course, if you're in California like we are, we have a very similar ed code. So I don't need you to get into the weeds there. I just don't. I want you to understand an IEP less legally conceptually and more just what are the tricks of the trade? How, as a parent that doesn't know the law, get the most out of it? But the law is important. And then when we talk about goals, the important thing to understand is this is, in a nutshell, the process. It starts with an assessment, right? If you're on an IEP, you've all had an assessment done of your child. It's typically called a psychoeducational evaluation, and we call it a triennial. The first one, of course, is the initial psychoed assessment, and it's to establish that your child is eligible for an IEP, right? There are 13 different eligibility categories. And your child, if they're on an IEP, falls into at least one, some multiple. Some so many you have to choose between 3 or 4 as to which is primary, which is the one that seems to everybody, which is not often easy to determine, but seems to everybody to be the primary disability that your child is challenged by. Right. So everyone on an IEP who's listening to this knows that there is at least one eligibility category that was established with the initial assessment, or your child wouldn't be on an IEP in the first place. So it starts with that assessment. And then in that assessment, which is a combination of interviews and observations and standardized tests, there is a list that you can create, and I invite you to create that list of all of the deficit areas, we call them, all right? So your child is now eligible, let's say for autism, just because it's a big eligibility category these days, and probably 40 or 50% of our clientele. And so what typically comes along with autism that you would find in the report, right? Social deficits, maybe some learning disabilities, right? Behind in math, English, writing or reading, significantly behind, not just 6 months or even 12, right? 18, 2 years or more. And then behaviors potentially are an issue. Everything as you're scouring that in advance of that IEP meeting now, right? You've asked for the report, you have it, you're reading it. One of the things you're looking for is all of the little deficit areas, little and big, that report uncovers that is a challenge for your child. Because once you're found eligible, right? Once your child is eligible for an IEP, then you're entitled to a goal in all the deficit areas, even if the deficit areas are not related to the eligibility category. So, for example, let's say your child is eligible under an SLD, a specific learning disability. Let's say they have dyslexia as an example. And that's the core of why your child's on an IEP. But there's also ADHD. So there's focus issues, distraction issues, getting things done issues, executive functioning issues, right? Maybe there's even social issues. They're there because of the learning disability, or they're on an IEP, I should say, because of the learning disability, but socially, they're also struggling. It's not why they're on an IEP, but it's a deficit area, right? Because the IEP, you're on an IEP because of an SLD, a specific learning disability, dyslexia, but there's still a social deficit. You want to make sure there's a goal for that social deficit as well, not just goals around reading. Okay, that's an important point. As you're reading these documents, I'll say it again, going into an IEP, you're looking for all the deficit areas. And then what the law says is there should be a goal for each one. So now you're walking into that IEP with a list potentially of all the deficit areas that they just pointed out to you in their report. Okay, great. Thank you. That's what that report is designed to do. It's exactly why they do it. But you need to understand that's why they do it, so that you can make your own list of the deficit areas and walk in and say, listen, you only have 3 goals. My child has 8 different deficit areas, right? Here's page 4 of the report. Deficit number 1. Boom, 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 boom. Now you've established you don't just want 3 goals for your child. You want 8. And maybe even more. Because if your child has reading deficits, it could be all over the board. Fluency, decoding, comprehension, right? There's all kinds of things involved in writing, capitalization, punctualization, right? Grammar, spelling, just the breadth of what your child is capable of writing, topic, right? Adherence. I mean, there's so many things associated with some of these sort of what we call big picture challenges like dyslexia and or writing disabilities that we want multiple goals for each, right? If your child struggles in decoding, fluency, and comprehension, you need 3 reading goals, not 1. So, right, so reading that report, gleaning all of the deficit areas that are key to your child's development, right, that you want them to write a goal about is one great way to prepare for an IEP. Then you theoretically also have the draft IEP with the draft goals. So you're going to recognize even going in that they've only really identified 3 deficit areas for goals, and there should be 8. Okay, so now you've established that a deficit list and that you want a goal for each of those. And very often when you walk into these IEPs, of course, they've created baselines for only the 3 goals that they've identified for you. And then you need to send them back, now that you've identified other deficit areas, to create goals for those, right? Because that is one of the huge keys to every IEP, is the goal baselines. When you think of goals, I want your first thought to be the baseline of that skill that they're working at, right? That deficit area, where is your child exactly in that deficit, right? With that skill. Because that is the most important part of every goal. Nobody thinks so. Everybody's looking at the goal of what they want the child to do in a year, right? That's the whole purpose of the goal. Okay, what do we think Johnny should do in a year given this baseline? But the important part is the baseline. Is it accurate? Right? And is it measurable? Those are the 2 things, accuracy and measurable for every baseline, because it's that baseline year over year, as we collect data year over year, that is going to tell you whether your child is making progress or not. Okay? It's not the goal. Goals don't even need to be met for the district to do its job. There just needs to be meaningful progress toward that goal. But without an accurate baseline, you will struggle to prove progress or lack thereof. And you don't ever want to be in a position where the district says there's progress and the goal and baseline are so poorly written and not measurable that there's no progress. You're working with your kid every night. You can't get any progress going, but they're saying, no, things are moving along just fine. And you can't see any evidence of that anywhere because the goal baselines are not proper and appropriate and defined and measurable. And more importantly than anything else, accurate. So as you walk into, right, you've read the IEP, you've established your deficit list, you know what goals that they want, you know what goals you're going to ask for, and you're prepared because the new goals that you're bringing in don't have baselines, to send them back to the drawing board, to the classroom, to create baselines for those skills, right? You have to do that in every circumstance. All right. I'm going to pick up next time with the second half of this goal discussion because it's that important. We're at the time limit that I have for this episode of Special Education Essentials. I hope you are enjoying this, or at least learning from it. If it's not very entertaining, I understand, but I hope you're getting information from it that is helping you to better understand how to improve your child's progress and make their IEP more efficient and effective for your child. All right, with that, next time we'll talk about, we'll finish the goals and go to the rest of my 10 rules. And then thereafter, we'll start with interviews with people in the special needs industry And hopefully over the course of our time together, you'll pick up the kinds of things that you need to really drive progress with your child in the classroom. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. And I will see you next time.
You've been tuning in to the Special Education Essentials for Parents and Families podcast with your host, David Tollner. This podcast is not intended as legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please talk to your legal counsel about your own situation. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, TollnerLawOffices.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.